There are so many tier 10 vehicles within World of Tanks console, but today's video is looking at the 5 vehicles that I think everybody should have and try out, whether they are the best or maybe they're just a ton of fun to actually try out. That is exactly what we're trying to showcase here today, so you get a good mix of the best tanks in the game that you can get for free without having to spend a load of money on buying premium tanks. Yeah, this is what we're looking at today. So the first vehicle that I think won't come as a surprise to anyone, but one of the best learning vehicles for anything is the Super Conqueror. This is the tier 10 British heavy tank that features 400 alpha damage, insane accuracy, decent armor, especially really strong on the turret, with the frontal hull armor being quite weak and quite big and chunky, and doesn't really absorb much damage, but the turret is certainly something to contend with and makes this tank an absolute monster. Combined with a 10 degrees of gun depression, make it one of the best vehicles that you can use as a beginner to World of Tanks, because not only does it have good DPM, great accuracy, and of course the ability to kind of get forward a little bit with the 35 kilometers an hour, which you don't see from some of the super heavy vehicles, the Maus, the E100, the Type 4, Type 5 heavies, those sorts of vehicles. This one is a little bit faster. Now, it's certainly not the fastest, but it is definitely one of the vehicles that will teach you a lot about the game, how to get hold down, how to use armor, and when you are one of the best players in the game, or you're getting much better at the game as you develop in World of Tanks, you'll find that this tank is actually one of the most dominant tier 10 tanks in the game right now, because of its solid DPM, great accuracy, and of course that turret with the 10 degrees of gun depression. So it is definitely one of the vehicles that I think everybody should own. It is a pleasure to play, and some of the tanks leading up to it in the tech tree are just as good. You have the Conqueror, the tier 9 version, which is equally just as good. It's a tier 9 version of the same tank with slightly worse statistics, but outrageous as to how good this tank can actually be. And of course, if you are interested in picking up the entire Super Conqueror line, including the ones before it, then it's definitely worth trying out. But that's not it for today. We've got another 4 to check out. Well, what do we go for in the next one? Well, the next one is looking at a bit of fun, because there's a ton of tier 10 tanks and we don't want to just showcase off the ones that are super OP. Well, this one is one that everybody is going to know, the FV4005, and one of the best vehicles for having a ton of fun, being able to hit things for 1450 damage, which you don't see so much with a lot of the high-end tank destroyers, and although this gets absolutely no armor and is a big target for artillery and anyone with HE rounds loaded, yeah, it is a ton of fun to hit them back for 1450 damage. It's one of the biggest main armaments in the game, and is certainly one of the best ways of kind of enjoying the game and having a little bit of fun, whilst also, you know, not taking it too seriously when you're thinking about a tank like this. At the end of the day, a lot of the times it's just down to the map and certain things like that that make this tank not perform as well, and it is quite hard to perform consistently well due to the fact that often in the beginning of the games you have to do well because you need the full health targets to hit, because you've got high alpha. If at the end of the game you're hitting people for 400 damage, even though you can deal 1450, of course you're limited by how much health they have left. But this tank is so amazing to try out. Its accuracy is actually not too bad, considering that it's a huge main armament, and also the fact that, you know, with all of the accuracy buffs and changes that we've had over the years, and especially the last couple of years, yeah, 0.35 accuracy on a 183mm is absolutely crazy. And when you combine that with the ability to swap between all of your rounds, whether you want to fire AP, HESH, or the cheap HESH, you have that option with advanced reload, and it's often one of the things that I would recommend, and one of the only pieces of equipment that I would recommend or one of the only times that I would recommend advanced reload is on these super high alpha damage tanks that do have different rounds that deal different amounts of damage. This is one of them, and of course the AP deals 1150, the Hesh rounds, or the premium Hesh, deals 1450, and then the HE variant deals 1650 but only has 92 pen. So you got the option to swap between all of them, and that makes it a ton of fun, especially when you find those super lightly armoured vehicles and can hit them for 1650. Yeah, it really does feel really rewarding to play, and is a definite tough 3-mark grind, because you have to play consistently in a tank that is somewhat inconsistent, whether that be due to the map or whether that be due to you just not hitting that game. And of course, maybe you hit into spaced armor, etc., or the RNG screws you. Yeah, it can make a big impact on a tank like this. So as a beginner, it's fun to try out, but it probably isn't your go-to, but it is super fun to play regardless of what skill level you are, and the more experienced you are, the better it's going to feel playing this tank. Of course, when it comes to easy to play vehicles, there's not really a whole lot more than the IS-7 that can offer that experience. The IS-7 is a fantastic vehicle for both brand new players and also experienced players that have played the game and maybe they haven't actually taken the IS-7 out recently. Well, I recently took it out, I tried it out, and it was a ton of fun. It combines both fun and the ability to actually perform, which makes this tank really good. I feel like that is a solid mix. If you can find a tank that's good but also very fun to play, then you're in the best kind of scenario, and this one is definitely that. The IS-7 features some of the strongest turret armor in the game. It's absolutely crazy, with minuscule cupolas that can't really be penned from the front unless someone gets so lucky, which does happen, trust me. I mean, I've been in FV4005s and hit this thing in the cupola and penned, but that's something to say for a different day, that it's very unlikely that that is going to happen, but it does have weak points on those cupolas, the 2 round discs on top there, but of course when you're flat with this thing you can't actually see them, so not really a weak point. Upper plate, lower plate, pretty garbage. I mean, you get penned by most people. Tier 8s will bounce off the upper plate, but as soon as you angle like this, you can get penned in the near side upper plate, and the right, like the other side, is basically impenetrable, but of course you want to do a kind of little bit of a wiggle, and hopefully people will bounce onto the wrong side from where they should be aiming when they're looking at you. So that's something you can do. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about the IS-7 is the top speed. As you can see, I'm not playing the IS-7 in a traditional manner whereby we're trying to play it to the most competitive level it can be played. I'm playing it for fun, and in order to play for fun, we've dropped on the traction system and advanced powertrain. You're probably thinking, why are you using that on the IS-7? Well, it's because the top speed limit now, having made those changes, is 72 kilometers an hour on a heavy tank that weighs an absolute ton, quite literally. And with the IS-7 being able to go 70 kilometers an hour, though it doesn't actually ever really reach 72 kilometers an hour in almost every case, probably sitting around 50 kilometers an hour, it can get up to 72 if you're going down a hill, for example. And that's really where that comes in, the 72 kilometers an hour, when you're going down a hill into an opponent, ramming them at full speed. Perfect. That's where you're going to deal a ton of damage, or maybe you're dropping onto someone, you never know. And that's where we went for the kind of ramming build, and of course changed our commander perks, etc. But the IS-7 is really fun for doing that. It gets super nice alpha. 490 is a nice little middle range where you're not too high of an alpha, where you know you're having to deal with the reload speed being bad and people poking out and getting multiple shots into you after every time you fire, but also not too low to the point where you're having to poke out against a lot of people multiple times for every time they fire. So it's kind of one of those things where it's a nice balance, it's enough damage to kind of trade a lot with a lot of tanks. If you trade with a tank that has 700 alpha, it's not the worst thing in the world. Of course, you'll be down on hit points compared to them, but at the end of the day, you can make that up for with the reload speed and hopefully the armor to bounce a few rounds, as well as being able to dominate people with lower alpha who are going to equally just as likely to bounce off of you on the turret and that sort of thing as well. Doesn't get the best gun depression in the world, 6 degrees, but it isn't the worst in the game. And of course that means that you are going to have to play on kind of hold down positions as opposed to going on ridge lines, that sort of thing, which the Super Conqueror can do. So there is that kind of weak point with this tank, but overall an amazing tank to try out and definitely a ton of fun. And it's one of the ones that I highly recommend as a vehicle that everyone should try out at least somewhat. And the whole tech tree line leading up to it is pretty fun, albeit the Object 257 is not so fun. But either way, of course, then we've got into the next section, which is the autoloader section. Autoloaders wise, the TVP T5051 is one of my favourite autoloaders in the game, hence why I actually went ahead and tried to 3-mark it, which we successfully did quite a few years ago now, and I haven't really played it since. But that's not because the tank isn't good. The tank is absolutely amazing. It combines a brilliant autoloader with 4 shells of 320 damage that take approximately 4.5 seconds to fully unload the clip from the scratch. You can deal 1280 damage, I believe, in one clip, which is very, very nice. And of course, you have the ability to spread damage out against multiple opponents. So you can track people, you can end up retracking people and that sort of thing. And you can get a ton of assistance damage with this tank. Combine that with the amazing view range and pretty decent still concealment for a medium. It makes it very, very easy to get assistance damage in general. And when you've got the autoloader, you can quite easily go in and deal with a lot of opponents all at once, as well as being able to target out a single opponent. Use your top speed of 60 kilometers an hour, which is effective top speed because your power to weight ratio is amazing in this tank, and you can go around them, you can track them, you can lock them down in place whilst you flank around them and that sort of thing, and it makes this tank very, very fun to play. DPM wise, it is on the lower side, but it's still okay, and it doesn't really feel like you're ever negative on that. It's really just a case of it has amazing effective damage per minute, where you unload all your clip within a super short period of time, whereby most people are going to take all of them if you're aiming correctly. And although this tank doesn't really have any armor, I mean, you'll get penned by tier 6s in this sort of thing, but at the end of the day, when you're playing up against tier 8s and above, every single person is going to pen you regardless, really, unless they hit a stupid angle, which doesn't really happen. So yeah, tier 8s and above are going to pen you every single time, and of course even tier 6s, if you were ever to be able to somehow get against them, would be able to pen you. So that's the sort of armor we're looking at when we look at the TVP T5051. The tech tree line leading up to it is actually really nice, apart from the tier 8, which is the TVP VTU, and it probably sucks the most. But the TVP T5051 is just a real good combo of just everything that you want from a medium tank that has an autoloader, and is a brilliant way of actually getting into autoloaders in general to have a really, really fun time and learn various different things about how to play autoloaders. And although it is quite punishing when you do get hit, the whole point is that you'll learn very quickly how to trade and use an autoloader that some of the heavily armored autoloaders just won't really teach you, because you just seem to get away with it, whereas you won't with this, and it will make you a better player in the long run. And I think the TVP is just an amazing way of kind of learning autoloaders and playing a tank that's fun, fast, and has pretty much everything that you need apart from armor. And then we move in to the final vehicle, the T110E4. The T110E4 is, of course, the tank destroyer at tier 10 for the American line. It comes off of the T30, and you have a ton of vehicles before that that are actually pretty fun to play. But the T110E4 is a combination of both a heavy tank and a tank destroyer with 850 alpha, and has pretty much the same top speed as what you would see from a Super Conqueror. So it's similar in speed. It's not too slow, it's not too fast. Its power to weight ratio is low, so it does take a while to get up to top speed, but it is what it is. It's a tank destroyer at the end of the day that has armor. And by armor, it combines both flat frontal armor that's super thick as well as some angled parts of the armor. The lower plate is a weak point on the E4 and can be penned fairly easily, but anyone knows where to hit it, which is basically anywhere on the lower plate with premium ammunition, or the left and right hand side if you're playing tier 8s with non-premium ammunition, and even then maybe wanting to load premium for those left and right hand sides of the E4, especially if it's angling like that. But the E4 cupola is also a weak point, but it requires quite considerable heat ammunition, or just premium ammunition in general, because it's weirdly angled and yeah, it's a bit of a pain to pen. So if you have premium and you want to pen the cupola, then that is kind of the way to do it. But as far as the E4 goes in terms of its playstyle and why I've chosen it today is because a lot of people go towards the E100, which is the German tier 10 heavy tank, which is this one here. But what the E4 does is basically be better than the E100 in almost most cases that you can kind of think of. Well, why is that? Well, although the E4 has considerably less hit points than the E100, the E4 has that extra bit of alpha damage. It also has better kind of gun statistics. It's just more accurate. It feels a lot easier to play than the E100. Its armor probably actually works better than the E100, considering that the E100's turret is basically very, very flat and can be penned by heat rounds. And then the lower plate being gigantic. E100 is gigantic, it's slower. Basically, the E4 is a better E100, and the E4 in general will teach you quite a lot about using armor and how to trade effectively on corners and how to make use of higher alpha damage tanks, which I think is very, very useful for playing a vehicle in this game. And what makes it good is that it does have a lot of options for its ammunition. You can use both the HE rounds with amazing HE pen of 90, so you can pen pretty much most lightly armored mediums, and of course light tanks in the game with that for 1100 damage, as well as having these absolutely insanely cracked APCR rounds, which have 375 pen. So yeah, very, very, very solid penetration on those. And then the AP rounds, you don't have to fire premium in this, 295 millimeters, which is the most, which is able to go through almost every vehicle that you need to through the front if you're aiming for their weak point. But the E4 is just a dominant tier 10 tank destroyer that I think, yeah, really deserves credit on this list. And I think it's a great starting place for people wanting to learn how to play high alpha TDs, rather than just going in and buying one. I think it's always best to grind out the core game, decide what sort of playstyle you like, and hopefully these couple of tanks give you a variety of playstyles that you could try out if you're not interested in kind of just grinding one line. Maybe you could grind a couple at the same time and try out different vehicles and see exactly what sort of tanks you like. All of these are somewhat different to each other to a degree, and hopefully that kind of conveys in this video. But if you found the video useful, or maybe you think that other vehicles are better, or maybe you think you would have chosen differently, that's absolutely fine. And of course, I'm not the be all and end all. These are just some tanks that I found really fun, and there's certainly a ton of vehicles that are in the list that I would recommend as well, and have as honorable mentions. But maybe we'll do that as a separate video to this, maybe a part 2 of vehicles that I find really fun, really useful in the game, and competitive at the same time. But hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, like the video, and of course check out some of the other videos that we have, including our How to Get Better at World of Tanks playlist, which covers a whole range of topics that will teach you how to play better, to increase your win rate and do more damage every game, as well as just the most recent gameplay episode that we've had on the channel. And hopefully I'll see you there. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.